Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webcast. We'll start in about a minute or two. Well, first, let me welcome our over 300 registered participants to today's webcast. My name is Jean-Marc Fix. I'm Vice President R&D for Biometric Risks here at Optimum Life Re. The principal function of my team is to update our underwriting manual, as well as provide expertise on mortality, especially as it relates to biomedical risks and innovation. I have over 25 years of experience in many aspects of life insurance, and I will be taking mostly a life insurance perspective here. I've spoken to a variety of audience, from agents to claims people. Just a couple announcements before we start the presentation proper. Our first ever claims seminar will be happening on October 7 in Dallas. And if you want to see me live, I'll be presenting at RAPA and at the SOA's Impact meeting in October. A couple of other housekeeping items. At the end of the webcast, you'll have a survey. They're really important for us, and we really would appreciate your time. It's also a good place to suggest topics for our next webcast. Finally, if you want to ask questions, we'll have hopefully enough time at the end to ask questions. Use the Q&A button on your Zoom application to make sure I see them. And if you don't have a chance to ask your question, use infous@optimumre.com, and we'll get to you with as much of an answer as we can. And on that, let's start. So welcome to Cancer, Tools for the Underwriter's Toolbox. It's always a challenge for me when I'm free to pick a topic on what to speak about. There's an infinite number of topics. I've presented on very many, and it's always a challenge to select a good one. When I picked cancer, I wanted to address this from a slightly different perspective. In truth, if you're an underwriter, you do not underwrite cancer. You underwrite a specific type of cancer of a specific stage and whatnot. So it's very specialized. But I thought there would be some interest for our underwriter friends as well as for our actuarial friends and anybody in between to have a kind of a broader perspective on cancer. I'm a big believer in a liberal education, and it's sometimes useful to understand the perspective of what you're looking at and not just get lost too much in the details. So we'll be covering what is cancer, putting cancer in perspective, look at mortality for cancer, look at prevention and risk factors, touch briefly on types of cancer and how are cancer evaluated. And then we'll spend a little bit of time on advances in cancer treatment, an area where there's been a tremendous amount of development, and I think is something that is important for most of us to follow closely. And then we'll close up with some practical advice and finally your Q&A. So the burden of cancer, it will not be a surprise to many that cancer is a really important cause of both disease and death. 2 million cases are expected in 2024, 600,000 deaths, and it's about 50-50 male-female. There is a 40% chance to develop cancer in your lifetime, starting from birth, and it's also 50-50 pretty much, it's the same amount for male and female. What is different, though, is the peak years. So the peak years are the same for male and female, and they're the age range 65 to 84. So a lot of interest for our underwriting. But that's where there's a difference between men and women. For men, it's 32% of cancers, but for women, it's 24% of cancers. And the cancers that happen earlier for women, and basically the big culprit is breast cancer that hits women at a much younger age than any other cancer does for men. So what is cancer? Cancer is really mutant cells of your body that gather some properties that make them dangerous for you. And the biggest property that they get is they can grow uncontrollably. And that growth will be the main reason why you might die from cancer. And the other aspect is because of that growth, they are easily spread over your body. That's what we call a metastasis. And that's bad news as well. So I say cancer is a genetic disease in the sense that it is a disease that affects the genetic material of your cells, your own cells. They don't come from somewhere else, except for maybe HPV, but that's another discussion. But mostly it's your own body cells that become defective in some way and that may turn into a cancer. It's not transmitted through your parents, but on the other hand, some predispositions may be transmitted to your parents. But it's basically a disease of your DNA of your cells. So how does a cell mutate? Really, the DNA damage happens in three areas that creates a cancer. First, a damage to the genes that are involved in the cell division, that once they're damaged will become oncogene. So those are the precursor genes that, when damaged, become oncogenes and allow the cancer to thrive. Second, damage to your tumor suppressor genes that control cell growth and division. Your body is well regulated normally, and cells are orderly in development and in growth. And that is broken with cancer. And finally, the DNA repair genes. Your body is also very good at fixing genes that are defective. But if the repair system itself is damaged, then it will not fix the genes that are defective adequately. So the path to cancer is really a numbers game, and it's a combination of numbers and bad luck. You have a bunch of normal cells in your body, all over your body, obviously. And as you live, you are exposed to a bunch of mutagens. So mutagens will be in the air you breathe, the food you take, the water you drink, the radiation you're subject to, a number of possible pathways for mutagens to happen. And when a mutagen hit a cell, there's a chance that the cell will mutate. Now, most of the cells that mutate in our bodies are killed. That's that little skull. And they're killed because the cell recognizes that it's damaged and pretty much commits suicide. That's called apoptosis. There is also an interesting factor that affects possibly longevity, is that some cells, instead of committing suicide, just become dormant, or what we thought was dormant until recently, and those are called senescent cells. So senescent cells are meant to protect us as well from those mutant cells. They have some effect as well on longevity, but that will be for another discussion. And then if some cells don't commit suicide and manage to make it through, that hammer represents your immune system, which is extremely performant in getting rid of foreign bodies. The mutated cell is a foreign body, and it'll catch generally most of them, if not all of them. Unfortunately, some of the cells will escape, and as you age, you are exposed to more and more mutated cells and more mutagens, and therefore the chances of you getting, unfortunately, a lucky winner cancer cell will increase. So that's why age is the primary factor for a cancer, for most cancers. It tremendously increased incidence for most cancer type by age, because it's a matter of accumulating enough mutated cell that one figure out how to become a cancer. And I mentioned some of the factors that affect them. Heredity can create some weaknesses in your genes. UV radiation, chemicals, viruses, smoking will create some problems. And cell division can go wrong. The repair mechanism we just discussed may not work as well as they used to, and that will introduce possible mutations in your body. So what are the mutated cells' special powers? Uh, Unregulated growth is the hallmark of cancer. They learn to ignore the need to have a signal to grow. So they'll grow on their own without any signal, and they'll ignore the signal to stop as well or to die. So that's why you can sometimes hear the term that cancer cells are immortal. Normal cells will divide only so many times before they can't do it anymore. Cancer cells figure out how to bypass that. They spread throughout your body as they multiply and detach and then travel through different systems to other parts of your body. That is create, of course, a lot of problems, and metastasis is a very lethal process. It has the power to attract blood vessel to grow towards the tumor. So there are substances in your body that favor the growth of blood vessel, and usually it's for healing purposes. But the tumors figure out how to use it for their own growth. They've learned also to hide from the immune system. As I mentioned, the immune system is good at recognizing foreign cells, and they're good at hiding from them. And some even hijack the immune system for their own protection. And finally, they accumulate changes. As they replicate rapidly, they increase the changes of having additional powerful mutations that'll make them more and more lethal. And one other thing that favors their growth is they figure out how to use other nutrients than glucose, the normal cell fuel. So they're able to hijack other nutrients to really grow very fast and in a very dangerous manner. So here I'll look at the most common cancer. It's the carcinoma, and it's a cancer of the epithelial cell, which are the cover cell for your skin and many of your internal organs as well. And normally those cells are quite organized in a nice carpet that protects you and protects the organ. But sometimes those cells overgrow, and then you get what is called hyperplasia. So a number of cells that abnormal, the organization is a little bit abnormal, but the cells themselves are normal. The next level up from an abnormality perspective is dysplasia, where now the cells stop being normal. And that's often a precursor for cancer. And that's why a lot of the pathology reports look at those factors to understand, is it just dysplasia or is it cancer? And that's really important to figure out. So to take a big perspective on cancer, I like this slide, although it's not the most recent, because it shows a couple of things. First, heart disease is still the number one, with about 700,000 deaths a year. Cancer is number two. I mentioned in 2024, we expect 612,000 deaths. It's not that different from 21 and 2020 as well. Here, the big change, of course, is COVID with a huge number of deaths. So that's a cause of death that popped out of nowhere and had a huge impact, and it still had a big impact in 22 and 23. 24 probably will have a much lesser impact. And when you look at mortality, that's what I do for a living. In 2017, there were about 2.8 million deaths in the US. In 2018, about 2.8 million deaths in the US. In 2019, about 2.8 million deaths in the US. And then you see that huge jump with COVID. And if you add the 2.8 to the 350,000 deaths from COVID in 2020, you still don't get 3.3 million. So there are also other factors that were involved in excess death that were not coded as COVID that really messed up our mortality. So just a little thing to show the importance of COVID, not just as a cause of death itself, but as a contributor maybe to a number of other causes of death. The top 5 cancer causes of death in 2021, and that's been very stable for many years, are pretty much the same. For young people, whether men or women, it's or boys or girls, it's brain cancer and leukemia and bone. Those are the most common. Those are the areas that develop tremendously during childhood, a lot of cell reproduction, and therefore a lot of chance for things to go wrong. After that, it gets pretty stable, and colon start to dominate, as well as lung cancer. And a big factor of lung cancer, of course, is smoking for men as well as for women. And then there's one thing that's different for men. Prostate cancer comes in, but later for older people, while for breast cancer, that happens at a much younger age. And that age 20 to 39 breast cancer is the top one, the top causes of death, and cervical cancer. So the importance of pap smear as well as the number one, number two. So the good news part of cancer, though, is the top lines is incidence, and those are age adjusted and population adjusted. So each year is really comparable to the other. They're not really a realistic representation of what happened that very year, but they give you the right amount of information for a trend. And you notice that the blue line and the red line for male and female have been pretty stable recently. The big peak in males in the 90s is the advent of PSA, which helped diagnose a whole bunch of prostate cancer a lot earlier than we used to. The dots on the right are the number for 2021. If you see the mortality, though, just below on the same scale here, same thing, male in blue and female in really pink, not red. You'll see that it's been decreasing for quite a few years since the 90s, and we'll go over some of the causes of that decrease. So in overall, from a mortality perspective, cancer is a good news story. If we look at the differences by gender, you see noticeable difference. Those are incidence rates, not mortality rates. A couple of things we're looking at is, especially more recently, prostate cancer and breast cancer incidence have increased. And it's always hard to figure out, is that due to changes in surveillance and better surveillance, or is there something else at play here? So looking at cancer incidence in the future, the US population is generally aging, and therefore we expect more cancer death and more cancer incidence than before, just from the aging of the population. But we expect a lower death rates, and that's what we've seen, and that should continue. But it's not all a rosy picture. Recent studies have raised the possibility that cancer incidence rates for quite a few cancers are different in the junior generation than the older generation. So in this case, Generation X and baby boomers. For both gender, thyroid, kidney, rectal, colon, and leukemia have increased. For women, uterine and pancreatic have increased, as well as non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. For men, prostate cancer has increased. It's not all increase. We've seen a decrease for both genders in lung, for women in cervical cancer, and for men, liver, gallbladder, and non-Hodgkin lymphoma. I discovered what happened to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma as I was doing the research for that. I'm not aware of any reason why this should be different in men than in women. So they'll bear to look at that in the future as well. So now looking at mortality, this is the same picture that we saw before, just at a different scale. So we can see really the decrease in cancer mortality when you adjust for age. And if we look at each cancer specifically, you can see the difference. It's a little bit hard to read, but the top line for male is prostate. The top line for female is breast early, and then lung and bronchus later. Excuse me, when I said prostate, the red line is really lung and bronchus. Prostate is the middle line, which will bump into it. The big reason for lung cancer going up and down is the increased prevalence of smoking. So that's how much impact smoking has had on cancer mortality over the years. So that's a primary driver of total cancer mortality. If we look at just the younger ages, so ages 0 to 49 here, we see generally a downtrend, except for colorectal and for women for uterine cervix, uterine cancer. It's uterine corpus, not uterine cervix. If we look at the survival rates throughout the decades, we see the huge improvement for some cancer. Thyroid used to have a 5-year survival rate of 92%. It's now 99%. Prostate was close to 70. It's now over 95. Melanoma was 80. It's now more than 90. Breast cancer was 75. It's close to 90. So those have been success story in cancer survival. Lower on the scale here, you can see that larynx cancer has not really improved that much survival-wise. And the bottom three are the most lethal cancer, and we've seen some improvement, but there's still a very low number. But pancreatic cancer used to have a survival of 3% after 5 years, not 13%. Not really a positive news, but it's still quite a difference. I wanted to spend a little bit of time on uterine corpus cancer because it's the only cancer whose survival has decreased over the last 40 years and not increased. So things have gotten worse for uterine corpus cancer. Some points to the fact that although it's the fourth cause of cancer death for women, as far as research funding, it is not one of the sexy causes, and it gets only 24% of the National Cancer Institute research funding budget. But there's really more to it than that. And if you look at the charts on the left here, you see by stage the survival, 5-year survival for uterine corpus cancer. In green is for white women, in blue is for Black women. And you can see that at all stages, on the left is when are they detected. So for all women, Black women's cancer are detected later than white women. And we know the later the cancer detection, the worse the prognosis is. On the right side is the survival. So not only overall, Black women die quite a bit more than white women, but at every single stage. So for the same stage, it's still the case. And in the end, it results that Black women survive at 84% compared to 63% for Black women. There are a number of causes, and I think it begs a number of interesting public health questions and equity question on what to do there. But it is true that Black women have a more aggressive type of uterine corpus cancer, but there are a lot of other indicators that point in the wrong direction. First, it takes more visits for them to be diagnosed than white women. And they're 50% less likely to get guideline concordant diagnostic procedures, so the state-of-the-art diagnostic procedures. And they're also less likely to get guideline concordant treatment. So not only the diagnostic is not up to snuff, but the treatment may also not be up to snuff. What's interesting is you see that in the US and the UK, but not in the Caribbean. So it points to some factors in some population that may bear looking at from a public health perspective. Here, we'll look more generally at a typical cancer mortality pattern. And really, from a mortality study perspective, we look at cancer one by one and substage by substage, using a tool that produces something like you see on the chart for colon cancer stage 3. Orange line is normal mortality. Blue line is the mortality of people that have that cancer, and the green line is the rating that we suggest we use. And you can see that there are really two patterns of mortality that most cancers have. The first one is kind of a straight line where things go worse and worse, survival decrease, but on a pretty even keel. And some of those either end up with an improvement, and you can basically consider them cured from a rating perspective. Some of them still have a residual, so are never fully cured, no matter how many years the cancer has happened. The other pattern that you notice is what I call the hockey stick, although my illustration here is not very hockey-ish, but it's a sharp drop up front and then a very different slope after a few years. So in this case, for colon cancer stage 3 for younger people, you can see that after 5 years, after 6 years, 50% of the people have died, and only 50% of them survived. But after that, you see something that is a lot more acceptable from a rating perspective, and you might be able, depending on the cancer, to offer some rating there. Something also to keep in mind on the residual versus cured, sometimes it's not because of the cancer that the person dies, is because of the consequences of the treatment. In particular, mental radiation is very dangerous. And in the early years, I think, of cancer treatment, we were a lot more generous in our application of radiation than we're now. So that can create some problem. The other is kind of the good news, bad news for much, much better survival for juvenile cancer due to, tons of research and funding money, is that now that juveniles survive their cancer, there are consequences of really drastic treatment that may have significant impact on mortality later in life. So there's something that is kind of the good news, bad news of being successful in treatment. And finally, I wanted to touch briefly that cancer death in the insurance world, that's the #1 cause of death across pretty much all ages, except maybe very young ages. So this is something that you need to keep in mind. It's very important. And part of the reason is because underwriting has been very successful in identifying and ranking properly or declining properly cardiovascular mortality. So that is #2. So in the life insurance world, cancer is #1, heart is #2. So looking at the risk factors and prevention. So remember the slide I had before, white cell mutate. So the risk factors are directly related to the mutation. The biggest one is age. The second one is tobacco. The third one is sun. Something that we're starting to understand and appreciate the importance is obesity, and I'll touch on that a little bit more later. Something that is starting to have interesting research consequences is the impact of the microbiome. So our body is not only full of our genetic material, it's full of bacteria and viruses that contribute their own genetic material to our body and how our body manages stress and disease. And then a family history. So 4 of those, we have some control. The microbiome is still quite experimental as far as treatment, so I'll skip that. But tobacco and sun are really easy to see. So you see that from a public health perspective, you remember those dropping mortality curve, especially for lung cancer. That's entirely due to tobacco control. All those measures to reduce tobacco use have paid huge dividends. It is, we don't see really a resurgence of tobacco, especially smoked tobacco. Now, vaping is a different story. It does not use tobacco. It has its own deleterious effect, but it does not contribute to cancer, as far as we know, as much definitely as tobacco. The second one that's really avoidable is sun. Any idea of tanning salon is like, those are melanoma salons. If you wanted to look tan, just use a beauty product if you must. Those are quite dangerous and quite controllable. And we're starting to see a lot of public health awareness on wearing sunscreen properly, making sure your children don't get sunburn and whatnot. I know that wasn't the case when I was growing up. Sunburn was part of summer. And then obesity. And for obesity, a number of cancers have been identified and connected to obesity. And you can see them on the slide, but breast cancer, colorectal cancer, endometrium, ovarian, meningioma, thyroid, all the big cancers are impacted by obesity. Top of that, a recent study point to a few more that may be also impacted, including non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And for non-smokers, head and neck and bladder cancers, which are obviously very impacted by tobacco. But even if you're a non-smoker, obesity has an impact of that. And as we start appreciating more the role of fat as a chemical secretor of substance, we understand that the greater degree of obesity is a compounding factor. The longer you've been obese, the more chances for damage. And unfortunately for us, an earlier adulthood onset of obesity, which is really rampant in our population, is really bad news. And those contribute to some of the incidents drag on improving incidence rates for a number of cancers. And this will continue to be a real issue. Now we're starting to see a lot more effort in obesity control, but there were a long ways of success there. So now looking at the types of cancers, most cancers, we think cancer, we think solid tumors. The lion's share is carcinoma. As I mentioned, those are cells that origin in the lining of your skin, or it is your skin, the outer layers of your skin, as well as the lining of your internal organs. Melanoma origins in the pigment on your skin, although you can find it in some other melanocytes that are not necessarily on your skin, like in your eye, and those really have very negative consequences for survival. And then sarcomas that affect connective and supportive tissues, as well as the lymphomas that affect lymphatic tissues, part of your immune system. And then the non-medical term of liquid malignancies really that affect the blood, or the blood generating organ, the bone marrow. So that's the leukemias and the multiple myelomas. I put central nervous system separately because although it's a solid tumor, the big compounding factor of central nervous system tumors is the central nervous system is encased in bone. There is no room for tumor to develop. If there's a tumor, it presses on stuff that it should and damages stuff that should not be damaged. So that has a really different risk profile than all the other cancers. In addition, connecting, getting treatment to those very sensitive areas is very challenging. So how is cancer evaluated? So most of the carcinomas and most of the solid tumors, we use what is called a TNM system coming from the American Joint Committee on Cancer, the 8th edition being the latest. And T stands for tumor, N is for node, M is for metastasis. From our perspective, which is really simplified and depends on each cancer and how bad it is, there is a number after T. The bigger the number, the worse the cancer, the more it has spread. Node is when it spreads beyond the initial lesion and it starts affecting your lymphatic system and your lymph nodes. That starts to become bad news because the lymphatic system drains your whole body, and therefore cancer cell there means they have traveled, and that really increases the chances for bad consequences. Same thing, the bigger the number, the worse it is. And then M is for metastasis. So M0 means you don't have it. Good news. M1, you have it, and it's very, very generally bad news. From an underwriting perspective, there's not very many cancer that I can think of that a metastasis can be acceptable. So the thing to remember, the bigger number, the more invasion has taken place. Smaller T's, more acceptable, and really depends on the cancer. Some of the cancers, N1 may be acceptable, some may not. Now, a couple other cancers have their own system. So lymphoma starts in the lymphatic system, starts in the lymph nodes usually. So, you can use the TNM. They all end something already to start up with. So there is another system that's used, really a number of systems. The most common is Ann Arbor. Lugano is quite similar. And it looks at stages, which is basically same thing, bigger, worse. It looks at the number, the location of lymph nodes. The more spread out the lymph nodes are, and in this case, the diaphragm is an important marker, the more the cancer has spread, the more it's bad news. The one thing that's really different, and I'll point your attention to it, is that for that, the modifiers, which exist also in the TNM system, I didn't go over it, the meaning depends on the cancer. But for lymphomas, the presence of systemic symptoms, fever, night sweats, weight loss, significant weight loss pretty fast, is really an important negative factor in the case of lymphoma. In general, weight loss in the context of cancer, sudden weight loss is not good news and should make you think of cancer if there's no other explanation. And then some other cancers are evaluated differently. Leukemias have their own system depending on the leukemia. And a tumor of the CNS have also a grading system that is different. The one thing about the central nervous system, it's quite isolated. So generally, tumors from the central nervous system don't come out. On the other hand, unfortunately, tumors can metastasize, especially lung cancer, can metastasize to the brain, And of course, that's very bad news. So a real exciting spot here is advances in cancer treatment, because as we've understood how to decrypt the genetic material of our cells and of the tumor, we've learned a lot about what cancers does or doesn't do. And that gives us some venues for treatment as well. And there's been a couple of factors that really come into play. Underlying those two factors, which are molecular analysis and engineering, the ability to create molecule, to read molecule, to see exactly how they work, and artificial intelligence that allows us to manage a whole bunch of data quickly in a way that makes sense, even though it might not be obvious to us. Uh, the big revolution has been an ability of computational data analytics here. That was spurred in the first place by trying to understand genetic material and the huge computational needs to understand genetic material, proteins, and whatnot. And that's really created a whole slew of downstream effects that's really facilitated both of those factors. So those factors are starting to really come into production, that they start to be not experimental, but they matter in treatment. And it's really an exciting time from a cancer research perspective. I think the last 10 years have been the most exciting time from a cancer research and cancer survival perspective. So here are a few. I don't have a lot of time to go into a lot of details, but the use of artificial intelligence to supplement imaging. It's unclear right now if the best AI system is better than the best pathologist, but for sure, the best AI system in a number of cancers, including melanoma, uh, is better than the worst pathologist, or a tired pathologist, or a grumpy pathologist that's thinking about something else. So those are, will have consequences, and those are direct consequences of our use of artificial intelligence in imaging. That's been happening for years. Recently, there's been a development in using some kind of AI to help guide a colonoscopy to identify lesions better. So there's a whole bunch of stuff where that has been at play. Also, with the ability of using massive amount of data quickly, better imaging has come out. The 3D mammography, some very specialized combination PET, CT scan that allow to identify prostate cancer much better, really have improved the detail of imaging that you can get with the cancer. And for a lot of time, especially for the one that are treated by surgery, good image means good treatment. You've probably seen a lot of press on liquid biopsies. This is an example of a test meant to detect high-grade prostate cancer, not just prostate cancer, because that's an issue with prostate cancer. Not all prostate cancer are equal from a mortality perspective, but there are many others. There's a colon cancer test that you can see now advertised. There's also on the same kind of technology, multi-cancer early detection test. In the insurance space, Grails has promoted their Gallery product. It's really an interesting read if you were interested on what can be detected now. Now, whether it has a role in underwriting or not at this time is a different story, but the technology is incredibly promising. And then the genomic profiling of the tumor itself. So the cancer cell has its own mutant genome, and understanding that allows you to profile treatments that are more appropriate for certain mutation and are able to target the cells a lot more specifically. And that brings us to the advances in cancer treatment. I think the most exciting thing in cancer treatment is immunotherapy. Our immune system has evolved over probably billion of years to be the effective killing germ machines it is now. And with just some minor adjustments, as we're starting to develop the technology, we can soup up the immune system to get rid of cancer cell. And the advantage of the immune system, it's all over your body. It's not in the tumor. It's not just around the tumor. It's around all the possible manifestation of the tumor replace cells. Now, mind you, that may have also other unintended consequences. So the technology is still TBD. There's also a cost issue. For instance, the CAR T cell therapy is where you use your own T cell that you extract from your own body, inject. Inject is a complicated chemical process, an engineering process, bioengineering process, some markers that allow those cells to recognize the cancer and then kill it. And then you multiply those cells, you re-inject them in the body, and if all goes well, the cancer can be actually cured now, not just in remission. I mentioned that some cancers are good at dodging immunity. So immune checkpoint inhibitors address that problem. There is some possible real attractive research on the cancer vaccine side. I just mentioned targeted therapies. AI has an impact not just in imaging, but all over science, and in particular for drug discovery. When you know what you're expecting, you can use AI to figure out drugs that can do the targeted effect because it's all a matter of the shape of the molecule. And you can do that. CRISPR gene editing to help with some specific defect. There's also been a lot of progress on minimally invasive surgery, robotic surgery, that has created less consequences downstream and improved survival. And finally, we don't hesitate now to use combination therapies. I guess a lesson we learned from HIV treatment that combination therapies are often better than just a single therapy. It's not always the case in cancer, but it's something worth following. And then finally, some research on the microbiome. I don't think it's quite ready for prime time, but I think that has also some potential interest. So it's a very dynamic, fluid environment. I think this is where the underwriters can also provide value to their companies by staying reasonably on top of what's happening and providing some color to their actuaries on, the impact of some of those technology and how quickly they think the impact will happen. It's a little bit of a crystal ball exercise, but I think it's a good intellectual exercise to look at what's happening and asking yourself interesting question about that and projecting the results in the future. But in reality, the real game changer, and we've seen it from a mortality perspective, and we've seen it for the lung cancer perspective, is public health and risk factor reduction. As we focus on the big cause of public health problems, so less tobacco, less unprotected sunlight, and so on with other risk factor reduction, we really can change that curve. The others are good, but they're a little bit after the fact. It's better to not catch cancer at all than to cure cancer. Cancer vaccine might be the exception to that, so that's why that is also very promising. So as we get close to the end, a little bit of practical advice. And I think of key factors in evaluating cancer in two buckets. The cancer-related bucket and the other bucket, which is more the insurance-related bucket. So on the cancer-related bucket, as I mentioned earlier, you don't underwrite cancer, you underwrite a specific stage of a specific cancer. And that's important to get in the details of exactly what it is. Details matter here. Going in the pathology reports in detail, not just the summaries, is key. How good is the follow-up? Are there treatment up to date? Has there been no recurrence, obviously? Has the person continuing the bad habit, like smoking when you're oral lung cancer, or for that matter, if you're a heart attack survivor? Those are important. Then family history is a good indicator for a number of cancer. A heavy family history of cancer is generally something to worry about. On the other side, more general insurance type of underwriting, lack of records is a bad thing. In cancer, details matter, and the precise the records are, especially on the pathology side and the follow-up side, the better it is. And then watch out for anti-selection. Everybody knows that cancer is not good news, has a high mortality impact. So, why not top up your insurance or get a high face amounts? So is a visit upcoming, and is that potentially motivating the increased face amount? Has a visit just happened and you didn't have the records? Well, get the records before you do anything drastic here. Is the face amount out of line with what the insurance means of the applicant are? The challenge that you have often is, what if the cancer is a long time ago? As I said, that varies from cancer to cancer. For some cancers, then you're good to go. Some cancers, you're not. And also, sometimes the applicant will not remember the details of their cancer, especially on the staging side. So sometimes you might have to use the treatment to infer the staging, and then should refer to your manual on that. Other couple of things that have an importance is product, and obviously the overall health of the person. The more frail the person is, the worse news it is for underwriting in general, and cancer underwriting in particular. And to conclude, some personal advice from a friend. And first, just keep in mind that not only am I not a doctor, but I still do not offer medical advice, no matter how much you try to bribe me. And I asked a friend that had an early unexpected cancer from the lessons she learned going through her experience. And those 3 bullets are what she told me. So the first thing is trust your instinct. If you're not feeling well, unless you're a hypochondriac, but there's something wrong, you need to dig into it. Don't hesitate to advocate for yourself. Unfortunately, those 2 advice are good, not just for cancer, but for everything else. And then do your research. If you're an underwriter, you have an edge of understanding treatment, therapies, possibilities, diagnosis. Use that and do what you need to do to understand what's the best route. There is more than one way to skin a cat, and there's more than one way to treat cancer. Some may have consequences that you might not want to experience, for instance, on your fertility, and you might want to see if alternate treatment might be not better for you than just the standard treatment. And finally, for all of us, be a friend. As you get older, you will see your friends, or maybe you, get cancer around you, and it's important to support them. It's important to support the research as well on a more general level, and that's a really important source of support that you can give to everyone. Okay, we're getting to the Q&A part of our discussion. I do not see any Q&A so far, so we might get off early, but it's your big chance. I'll wait a few more minutes here on questions on cancer. So this was a little bit of an unusual perspective that we're looking at, really educating you on the scope of cancer and how cancer is different from the other medical impairments that you might be underwriting. So I thought it'd be valuable for us to really delve on that. I have not seen a presentation on cancer at a high level anywhere in the insurance industry. So I think it was interesting to delve into it, see what is different. It's also an area where underwriters and actuaries can interact. One of the big questions for actuaries looking at mortality is, what will mortality do in the future? And a big chunk of that answer, and a big positive chunk of that answer, as in mortality improving, is cancer. And staying on top of cancer research and understanding what may or may not have an impact is really important. So I finally did get a question. So does sun have an impact on skin cancer only? As far as I know, the answer is mostly yes. I'll double check. But for sure, the biggest impact is on skin cancer. And not just melanomas, mind you. There's a couple type of cancer, squamous cell, among others, that may have a very dangerous impact. The flip side of it, not all melanomas happen on the skin, and those, because they're hard to discover, are a real problem. In particular, nail bed melanoma or retinal melanoma. So the sun is a big risk factor, by far the biggest for skin cancer. I'm not aware of it having an impact on other cancers, but I'll double check that and provide a corrected answer if I'm wrong. Any other questions? Well, if there's none, I invite you to send us questions later on if they come to your attention, either to my email or better info@optimumre.com. I invite you to attend our next webcast, and I also invite you to answer the survey. There's a couple of things that just popped up at the very last second. One was not really a question, so I'll dodge that. And the other is regarding thyroid cancer. Unfortunately, I'm not prepared to answer that question off the bat. But thyroid cancer, if treatment has been successful, has a very, very good prognosis. Um, the cancer, if both lobes are taken out, and usually that's not the preferred option treatment, there's still a chance that a little bit of the cancer might be missed. So there could be a recurrence in the same area. More likely, there's a distant metastasis that wasn't caught, is really the problem. Finally, how would you use in remission in terms of underwriting? I'd say pretty much it doesn't really matter. Cancer, once you have it, we right now don't really have a good way to be sure you've cleared all the cells. As I said, those cells travel all over your body. So there's always a possibility, even on skin cancer, that's the most obvious cancer to melanoma, that's the most obvious cancer to spot, that some of the cancer cells have traveled more further than expected by bad luck, and that you have something later. And as I mentioned, there's not only the consequences of cancer and having a recurrence later, uh, there is also the consequences of treatment. So from an underwriting perspective, I pretty much ignore remission. What I want to see is good follow-up with negative results. So that means at least we're not catching something. And that's the positive news. Now, depending on the cancer, that might be standard or not. And that's where you need to refer to your underwriting manual. But in remission is really not useful from an underwriting perspective. Okay, I think that's about all we have. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope you found this useful. Make sure you answer the survey, and especially topic suggestions or feedback on my presentation are super valuable. So I really appreciate that. Thank you very much for spending your lunch hour, your post-lunch hour with me. I hope you found it interesting, and I will talk to you soon.